You're listening to Margins and Meaning with John Wilson. Welcome back to Margins and Meaning. I am John Wilson, and this is episode 7. And today we're going to talk a little bit about, if I had to start over, what would I do differently? It all starts with a feeling and a description, much like these other episodes where stories are actually chronicling my history in this trade. Today is going to be no different. So let's start off. Guys, for as long as I can remember, my life has always been, about doing more than the next guy, working harder and just putting my head down and grinding it out. I didn't see it like I was in competition with anybody, but maybe I felt like it was just the way I was going to survive in this trade. I looked at it this way. Slowing down never felt, natural or neutral to me in a lot of ways. It felt dangerous. I always pictured myself like that Pulp Fiction reference, that race car in the red. I always saw myself, just flat out, pedal to the metal, never slowing down, maybe having different gears than my colleagues, but, always pushing. I never once coasted in this time. And the truth is, I think it was, when reflecting back on it today, I didn't know who I was without having all of that pressure on my shoulders. I guess stillness felt like maybe irresponsibility. Rest is for the weak and wicked. And I wasn't that person. So maybe if I slowed down, I was afraid something or somebody was going to catch up to me. I believed honestly that if I kept pushing, kept thinking, kept innovating in a lot of ways, then maybe absorbing this pressure wasn't going to be so bad. But more importantly, maybe I wouldn't fail because of it. And for a long time, I guess that belief kind of worked. I did build a lab. I did build some sort of reputation in this industry. I built a life inside of dentistry. But I can tell you guys, I built something else. A constant pressure on my chest every single day. A tension I didn't know how to turn off. And maybe a quiet little loneliness that comes from always being the one that has to carry that load. So in those years, I wasn't just working hard. I see it this way. I was the work. If something fell apart, well, I caught it. If someone struggled, well, I compensated. If the lab needed more of anything, I gave more. I thought that felt like responsibility. Maybe it was an honorable thing to do. Maybe it was what leadership was all about. I don't know. But the one thing I do know, looking back on it today, some of that wasn't leadership at all. It was only about control, maybe disguised as some sort of responsibility. Because as long as I carried everything, I never had to confront what I didn't know how to delegate. You see, when I started bringing staff on, that illusion just cracked. It was really, really difficult because not one employee I have ever had worked in the same manner that I did. Not because they didn't care, but maybe because they just weren't wired the same way my brain works. And for a long time, I took that really personally. You see, I set staff's expectations based upon my own engine, my tolerance for stress, my obsession in this trade. And when those expectations weren't met, well, frustration, it really built. So instead of those hard conversations, I thought, well, man, maybe I'm going to be smart about this. Maybe I could build systems. I could write policy. I could tighten procedures up. So I could let all of that structure do the talking for me because I didn't know how to do it. I didn't understand yet that the systems that I was trying so hard to put together, they just don't replace the leadership. They actually expose where it's missing. There's another part of all of this that I didn't understand. Being that person that always saves the day, well, it kind of feels pretty darn good. Feeds something deep inside you. And I think that's just human nature to want to feel value in that way. When people come to you last because they absolutely know that you're going to be able to fix a situation, well, that doesn't feel so bad, right? But if you're not careful, that praise really becomes a trap, you know, because being indispensable starts to feel like being valuable. And, it's one thing to have the skill set to do that, but if you're trying to build something, it kind of defeats the purpose. You see, when I was doing this and every time I stepped in and to save the day or fix something, I was actually training the system to just rely on me. And that was exactly what I was trying to get away from. I was trying to empower my technicians to make better decisions, to be able to run in a more independent state. So eventually, stepping in and doing these things was actually not feeling good anymore. I wasn't enjoying it. It was taking me further and further away from the joy of doing the craft. Because in the end, I was trying to really build something, but I was getting in the way again. So, like most small businesses, I think they're always going to have that chicken or the egg mentality at times. For me, it was hiring people should set me free in a lot of ways, give me time to do things that were more valuable to my business. But early on, I can tell you that staff felt like a financial cliff that I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to survive falling off of. And here's the part that no one likes to admit. Well, I know I don't like to admit this, but I had that technical skill. I knew how to do the craft. I knew what I was doing when I was sitting at the bench. That was where I felt most competent. But my business understanding, the part that is arguably the most important, I was still years behind. And as that lab grew, something became impossible to ignore. I was the real bottleneck of it all. And it wasn't because I didn't have the skill set to bring the work in. That was easy for me. The hardest part was getting the work out at a level of quality that I wasn't willing to compromise on. You see, I told myself that maybe I was protecting standards in that time, and maybe it was partially true, but another part of me was maybe protecting my ego or my identity. Because as long as I touched everything, no one could maybe see the gaps that were just blindly in your face, understanding that the business end of this was not being managed appropriately, including me. You see, scaling meant admitting that I didn't know how to scale, and that felt like failure, and I don't like that. So I stayed in the middle. I touched too much. I was carrying too many of these things on my shoulders. It was impossible for me to evolve. So protecting quality? Well, yeah, maybe. But more importantly, I was quietly suffocating the potential that we had here in these years. I can tell you this, that being a technician and being a business owner, two completely different lives, learning about pricing and branding and defining yourself and finding your niche, I can tell you, nobody ever handed me any of the tools for that. Nothing of real value was ever given to me in those years. I share with others that I learned it all by osmosis, meaning that I was just in the mix of it all. I was watching others and guessing along the ways a lot of times, but the best thing I can say is the failures allowed me to make it up as I went. And even now, decades later into this trade, I still catch myself fighting what I call yesterday's thinking. What worked before should work today, so why change it up? Early on, I didn't have those tools to truly run a business in any way. That didn't make me incapable of it, it just made me feel like a fraud. That imposter, again, just owning that job and not a business. Not ever really understanding the labels that I needed to try to call myself so that I could evolve. So every time I priced work without confidence, every single time I said yes because it was easier than saying no, and every time I hoped things would work out, well, in the back of my mind, those fraudulent terms came out and I felt like a failure. I never was allowing myself to grow because I didn't have those skills. So let me explain this, what it actually feels like. On the outside, things look fine. Work's coming in, people are busy, you're respected. But internally, man, you're guessing more than you'd like to admit. You don't trust your pricing, you don't trust your margins, you don't trust that next decision won't hurt you. You're always worrying. You wake up already behind. Your brain never really shuts off. Every decision feels heavy and rest doesn't feel restorative. It feels irresponsible. You know you have things to do. You're not running a business, you're running a job. That happens to employ other people, but admitting that, even to yourself, is deeply uncomfortable. Nobody likes that because you've already sacrificed too much to believe it shouldn't be working. So admitting in those years that evolution, the learning of how to run a business, well, there was some blinding times that would come and kick you in the teeth, and it would mark you. I can tell you when I recognized something that was super powerful, and I want to share it with you. Policy, these great things that we want to set up. Well, you know what? When you're willing to set policy, that's fantastic. That's something that you should be proud of, but it really means nothing if you're not willing to enforce it. You see, I had those rules. We put the procedures together. We had binders full of intention to try to guide our staff. But what I didn't have, well, I didn't have that stomach for the discomfort that all of that would put together. Not because I was weak, but you know what? That just really sucks the life out of you. And maybe by avoiding that enforcement, when I look at it now, it's easy to see that I was letting other people determine my path. Not in an aggressive or malicious way, but maybe quietly. You see, avoidance didn't feel dangerous. It felt kind of polite sometimes, and I was being flexible. It feels kind of reasonable. At least that's how you can justify it to yourself. Until one day, I remember the day for myself, I realized that, you're living inside decisions that you never consciously made. And I just knew that I had to make a change. So looking back with the wisdom that I have today, hey, the avoidance that I think all of us in this trade make at one time or another, it doesn't really present itself in such a loud manner. It kind of sneaks in there from time to time. We make all these sayings up for ourselves, oh, I'll deal with this client later, or maybe this client just needs a little more flexibility. He'll eventually pay. Now's not the time to rock the boat. All of these little sayings you would tell yourself to try to make the situation go away. And when you're somebody that cares deeply about what you do, avoidance kind of feels like you're just being maybe kind. You tell yourself, being patient or understanding or easy to work with, that's the goal. But slowly something shifts because you start carrying this resentment. You resent these people that absolutely understand your terms, your policy. They know the rules, but they're choosing intentionally to break them. They're making the rules up themselves for a path on your future. You don't want to be in that position. So what do? You work harder. You try to compensate for this. You internalize that frustration. And you mistake that tolerance for leadership in some way to make yourself feel better. So by drifting into that avoidance, you are, again, allowing that fear to make the decisions for you. And the day that I decided that I needed to take control of my life, allowed so many more things to open up for me. So I'm going to tell you something, guys. There was a turning point. We had a lab that was churning out the work. We had those systems that were actually working. I was starting to become a better businessman until I looked down at a balance sheet that was just completely out of control. A number so large that I would have never thought that I would have floating out there in midair. Over $500,000 of unsecured debt, 100 days out, and I'm sitting there looking at my bank account thinking what I could be doing with that money. It frustrated me, but it was actually, it humbled me in a lot of ways because it just pushed me back to that understanding that I really wasn't running this business on policy. I wasn't enforcing it. I was sitting in that room looking at that computer screen, and I just started thinking what I could do with all of that money to make this business that much more effective. And I didn't really panic at that time, but I should have. I did feel a bit exposed about this because, I was proud of the fact that I built something, but I was embarrassed by the fact that maybe it was so flippin' fragile because I was too afraid to stand up for what I thought I was worth. You see, my stress was maxed out. My health did not feel good. I didn't want to stroke out with all of this stuff, trying to be flexible. That was just stupid. So I made this decision. That, the terms were going to stop being just a suggestion. They became mandates. And of course, my clients, I had pushbacks. But what really surprised me after it all was that fear kind of faded after I stood my ground. I was not worried of the consequences. I just wanted to be able to get paid in the timely manner for the work that I was so proud of putting out. So that conversation that I avoided for years was so silly. It was so easily survivable. But something I hadn't felt in a long time after I started instilling policy was relief. I stopped letting clients decide when my work decided to be paid for. I chose to not have just a few high-volume clients. I looked for more eggs in that basket. It allowed me to control that fear of losing a client. Losing a client for the right reasons to me was not fear anymore. I was going to stand my ground. I was going to mandate credit cards over any other form of payment, and that would allow me to control my AR. I was looking more for distance over the dependency of having just local clients as well. Mail orders started to come in. And everything in my life changed because I stood tall. So now making these radical changes, not just in how I collected my money or who I chose to work with and the people that we would market to and the path that the lab was actually taking in those years, it all changed because of one real thing. I stopped allowing these fear-based decisions to guide me. That fundamentally shifted of philosophy allowed me to really not be beholden to anything or anyone anymore, especially not to clients or industry standards or any sort of expectations I put on myself that was costing me my health. And for the first time, the first time my business started to support my life rather than that business taking everything out of me and consuming it. Reliving all these memories and bringing back and reliving the feelings that were going through my head in the time. I didn't feel like these new mandates were some triumphant accomplishment. I certainly didn't. It felt kind of quiet and I didn't have people to talk to about this, and it was hard. And I can tell you for true that, there were times that, I was, Enforcing these boundaries and really thinking, wow, did I really go too far? Did I really just destroy everything that I worked so hard to build? Clients left, the conversations on the telephone ended a little bit more differently. True partners really raised, their hands, and I could see who aligned best with me. But in that time, that quietness, that bit of slowdown, the loss of revenue, I still knew at that time that I had to do this. It's funny, we look back the ebbs and flows of our career and you look at this stuff, and every single time my little successful laboratory would slow down, I would take it personally. I'd look at it, and instead of enjoying that slowing down, a little less responsibility, take a little bit of time, enjoy it a little bit, and know that it's coming back. All I would ever do, and I still do, is worry a little bit. There's no reason for that. We've created something amazing, and it's all based upon those hard decisions that I made in the time. It became rather clear the people that decided to partner with me and align themselves and allow me to join their teams and really have a great relationship, well, those are exactly what I wanted to build. So sometimes those hardest decisions in life really become very clear. But often in the time, guys, it's muddied by the pain that comes with it. So I can't believe that we've got 7 episodes in the can right now, and I'm sharing this story in such a detail. I don't think I'm anything special. I think I'm that average dude that fell into a trade, found happiness in it, and struggled along the way. I think that if I'm going to mark myself as different in any way, it's going to be because I have no ego. I'm here sharing my story, my failures, my heartache in this, and doing it for one reason. You see, in my life, I believe hard-earned life wisdom is best shared. I think that some of these common challenges that our trade has should be shared in a manner that is going to benefit one another. And if you've been here for the first 6 or 7 episodes and these words are connecting with you in a deep manner, maybe they're a little too close to home. Maybe you're feeling that my story is your story. Well, that's because it's probably a pretty common occurrence in this trade. I just think that people aren't sharing these things as openly as I have been doing. So guys, today, if you've gotten this far, I want to tie it together. I want to share one really strong truth. You have the right. You have the ability. You can make the hard choices that you already know you should be making. You can change. Stop letting fear guide your path. Take a hold of your life. Drive that path differently than the path that you're on today. And remember, guys, just because the world all does the same thing over and over and over doesn't mean it's correct. It doesn't mean it's right for you. And remember this, guys, this hard-earned lesson that I will have given you today, it is this. Just because someone values your flexibility because it benefits them certainly doesn't make them your partner. Often it makes them a liability, and you need to be keen to those aspects. Be strong. Make great policy, but be stronger to enforce it. And understand this, that policy itself all sounds good, but it sounds even better when you stand tall enough to enforce it. Thank you so much for listening. And this is John Wilson once again for Margins and Meaning. And until next time, I say thank you and take care.